Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and today we're talking about the Avengers. But before we get into that, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but also we love hearing from you guys. We've got an awesome community here, and that's thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, all that said, let's dive in. Prologue to today's story begins all the way back in the era of King Arthur, when Arthur pulls Excalibur from the Star Stone. This event has been detailed in the Marvel UK comics. And in Marvel, the legendary sword known as Excalibur was sort of like a quirk. Think of it like this. Often, when we hear the folklore surrounding Halloween, we are told that October 31st is the night when the veil between the living and the dead is its most thin. So ghosts and such supposedly have an easier time making contact with the living on that night. Well, similarly, in Marvel, when the sword was pulled from the stone, that barrier between the living and the dead was rendered asunder. And as soon as that happened, an evil being known as Necromon invaded the mortal realm. He and his army of darkness were fought by Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Arthur's warriors chose code names like the Green Knight. They often wore color coded armor and had a symbol on their breastplate or their shield, making the Knights of the Round Table the first superhero team on Earth K. Anyways, in the end, Merlin created a barrier between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead, sealing Necromon away in his own realm for so long as the sword Excalibur exists. Which brings us to the main plot of today's game. On July 4th, 2025, the Shaper of Worlds encounters a supervillain named Flag Smasher, and the result is a wave of altered reality passing over the entire globe, destroying anything that represents government or kingship. And Excalibur is literally that. Having Excalibur was what demonstrated that King Arthur was the rightful king of England. So when the wave passes over the UK, the legendary sword known as Excalibur is destroyed, and the barrier between the living and the dead is also destroyed. Something worth noting is that a few years back in our game, we ran a story where various world leaders had been targeted by evil rebel Skrulls. So presidents, kings, queens, etc., had been disposed of. And in each case, some Skrull agent used their shape shifting to assume that person's appearance and rule that country in a way that would benefit the Skrulls. When that was all said and done, the villains who had eliminated the British royal family were overthrown, and King Arthur himself once again sat on the throne of England. It's also worth noting that in various Marvel comics, Arthur is alive and well in the modern day. He has teamed up with the superhero team named after his sword, and he's adventured alongside characters like Captain Britain and Megan. And that's just in the modern day. In other comic books, Camelot was once invaded by Kang the Conqueror, who defeated Merlin and took his place for a while. Kang was then defeated by the Fantastic Four. In another comic book, both Iron Man and Doctor Doom would end up in King Arthur's court. That comic was sort of a play on the fact that both characters wear armor. And in yet another comic, a portal opened up to Camelot one day and the Hulk crashed through. The Incredible Hulk actually destroyed the round table itself, not the organization, but the physical table. Point being, King Arthur has teamed up with the Marvel superheroes plenty of times, and on this day, Logan and Carol Danvers fly to where Arthur is in London. He is telling citizens to keep calm and carry on. Carol and Logan land near Arthur and tell him about the Shield helicarrier crash in New York and how the Shaper of Worlds unleashed an energy wave that has destroyed every world government. Carol then takes to the skies to catch a plane because, like we said in the last adventure, the air traffic controllers equipment has all failed because that's a government thing, right? So then Carol, played by my wife, is not in the rest of this adventure. My wife actually had to leave and go to a thing. At any rate, so despite everything that's going on, King Arthur keeps a level head and he starts to form a plan to counter all of this when suddenly Necromon shows up. And by the way, for anyone who's curious, Necromon's first appearance was in Hulk UK, issue number 42, which is dated December 1979. Point being, Necromon attacks his old enemy, Arthur, because in Marvel UK, Arthur represents life and is the counterbalance to Necromon, who is an avatar of death itself, much in the same way that DC Comics has Necron, leader of the Black Lantern Corps. Anyway, so Necromon attacks King Arthur. And while Excalibur itself is no more, King Arthur's scabbard still exists because that was a gift from Merlin. The scabbard is not the symbol of kingship that Excalibur was, but the scabbard does possess an amazing ability. We ran this in third edition GURP Supers, and the ability that we gave the scabbard is that it gives its wearer invulnerability to any kinetic damage. We also based Arthur's attributes on the stats that they gave us on page 18 of TSR's old deities and demigods. And those are as follows, by the way, for anyone who's curious: strength 18, dexterity 16, constitution 18, intelligence 18, wisdom 19, and charisma 18. So in GURPS, Arthur's punch damage is 1d6 plus 2, while his swing damage is 3d6. And swing damage represents the idea that Arthur picks up something and swings it, like a baseball bat or a sword would be good examples of this. So my son, who was playing Arthur in this adventure, looked around and saw where there were some stanchions set up nearby to keep people behind a line of red velvet ropes. So when Necromon attacks Arthur, the king dodges it, grabs one of those stanchions, and swings it like a ball bat, clubbing Necromon upside the head, making a loud clang sound. Wolverine pops his bone claws and takes a swipe at the undead villain, but the bad guy makes his dodge roll. The villain hits Arthur with a black sword, but Arthur's scabbard protects him from harm. These three characters, by the way, they duel for quite a while, and it was pretty epic. GURPS is really good for things like Star Wars, when a Jedi Knight and a Sith Lord fight with lightsabers. You wouldn't want it to be over quickly, right? You want each guy to hold his own. And that's exactly what happened in this fight. But what ultimately decided the fight was Arthur's scabbard, preventing him from taking damage to begin with, and Wolverine's healing factor, which allowed him to heal from the damage that he does take, while Necromon had neither of these things and was ultimately defeated. And that brings us to the epilogue. Wolverine breaks off a bone claw and then grows a new one. And Wolverine then uses that bone claw to remove Necromon's head and limbs and bury each part in a separate box. The reason that he broke the claw off was because we were concerned that the evil could somehow infect Wolverine, sort of like in Evil Dead when Ash Williams becomes a Deadite. We didn't want Wolverine to be possessed or something like that, have a zombie Wolverine running around. And burying the parts in separate boxes, it was like a very Dungeons and Dragons kind of an idea. The players didn't want Necromon just coming back easily. So the separate boxes were meant to at least slow him down, if not stop him entirely from being able to resurrect himself. So time will tell. But that was it for that adventure. Afterwards, we stayed on Discord and talked for a couple of hours. And I thought that parts of our discussion were worth sharing. My son, who played Arthur, was a little concerned at the direction that our game was taking. So we got to talking about Earth K, where over the years, King Arthur had repeatedly been a very big deal. In our game, he started off in space and then came to Earth in ancient Ireland, where the locals called him Dagda, right? Because they didn't know that the Earth was round back then, let alone that it was a planet or what a planet was. So they had no concept of like other planets, right? And then when Camelot rolled around, he was called Arthur, which means bear. And when Mordred defeated him and Camelot fell, Morgan Le Fay took Arthur to an island west of England where he healed and recovered and kept on going, right? And he was immortal. And through the centuries, he wandered, right? Kind of like a Highlander in a way, from the Highlander movies, I mean. So to the Geats, he was Beowulf, which again, it means bear, right? To Shakespeare, he was Oberon, which also means bear. Um, so clearly there was something going on in Europe in the Middle Ages where there was this idea that endured, you know what I mean? And so in our game, we're exploring that. And even in the Old West, the character is still referred to as the bear. And in our World War II games, Arthur found himself in London during the Blitz. And we hinted that this had something to do with the once and future king prophecy. So Arthur was a big deal in World War II. In our game, he was the guy who fought the leader of Germany in his bunker. That dictator, who, by the way, I think if I actually say his name on YouTube, it counts against my channel, so I won't say his name. But we all know who I'm talking about, right? The little man with the stupid mustache. That guy had a duplicator ray. So he and Arthur wrestled, basically, and the ray gun went off. And it was a strange scene with tons of Arthurs fighting tons of duplicates of that evil dictator. And there were two reasons why we did that. One was that in our game world, Marvel and DC stuff all coexists. And Marvel turned that dictator into a supervillain named Hate Monger, right? While in DC, something completely different happened with that character. So by making copies, it allowed for us to check off all of those boxes, right? Um, and we don't even limit ourselves to just Marvel and DC, we're kind of a melting pot of pop culture, right? So in Hellboy, they mentioned that evil dictator, and something else happened, and so you get the idea. It let us do all of that, and then likewise, um, I've always loved King Arthur, even as a kid, and I've been playing Arthur as my GMPC for decades now. And I wanted him to be in these various situations. So having clones of Arthur was cool because then one could go adventuring. And if he died, there were always more Arthurs out there then. And because he was my GMPC, one Arthur might get a Green Lantern ring, while another Arthur might end up with Marvel's Negabands, so on and so forth. And the other thing there was while players would come and go, Arthur was the one thing in our game that was a constant, right? Arthur was the through line for Earth K for 40 years of gameplay. And because I was also playing the game for 40 years, I learned what worked and what didn't. The player, knew how to push the attack or how to exploit the imperfections in the rule system itself, right? And so, because of all of that, whenever there was a crisis and the big bad guy was more than the players could handle, often the sort of the safety net, right? The last resort was that they would call in Arthur or one of his duplicates, who, by the way, are known by many different names, right? Each one of them is just trying to fit in with society, right? Anyways, um, no matter what the name was, it was always these guys, right, who saved the world time and time again. And so at some point, we have to look, take a step back and look at the whole thing and acknowledge that Arthur is on Earth K. He's the main character, right? And we started this game in the summer of 1985. And now, as of me recording this, it is the summer of 2025. And ever since August 29th of 1997, when we ran our version of the Crisis on Infinite Earths, we have done something huge at the end of every August since then. So, since it is now August, and because it is the 40th anniversary of the game this summer, we decided to put Arthur and his duplicates in the spotlight. For a really long time, I've sort of apologized for Arthur's enduring success in our game world. While we try to stay true to, Superman or Captain America and keep them close to what you see in the classic comics, Arthur, conversely, has had decades of character development and change and evolution, and he has become the linchpin for the Earth K dimension. And by the way, whenever people ask me what Earth K stood for, I'd always tell them this long-winded story about how my old GM was named Jay Mora, and in high school he would sign homework just with the letter J, right? So when we graduated, I took the game in one direction. He kind of didn't like it. He was running a thing in a different direction where there were the game world split, right, into two game worlds. And he referred to his version as Earth J. And so since I was the guy who came after him, in the alphabet, the letter after J is K. So that's why we called the world Earth K, right? Like I said, it's kind of a long-winded story. But point being, I'm starting to think maybe we should rethink that and that maybe totally by accident, maybe the K in Earth K stood for King Arthur all along. Anyways, so big things are coming. August is always, the biggest month of the year for us, and this August feels even bigger because of the 40th anniversary of the game. So I am excited about where all of this is going. I hope you guys are too. But anyways, I'm gonna wrap this one up. Before I go, smash that like button. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a comment. And from everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.